So I was asked today to talk about adapting to environmental change with the listed species. And that has happened, but honestly, I think that livestock operators and ranchers in this basin have been dealing with sage grouse, working with sage grouse standards and habitat needs since the mid-1990s. And so back then in 1992-93 on the South Parlin Flats allotment, we developed an allotment management plan that had sage grouse standards in it. So it's ramped up over the years, but really it hasn't just begun with a listed species. But I guess one of the things that I did change and started doing more of when the bird became listed was I started taking a better handle and doing more involvement with our own monitoring work. And one of those aspects is just taking pictures, because pictures can show a lot of things. And you can be out on the range and you see something, and then 6 months later, it's different if you've taken a picture than what you remember seeing. So this first picture, so this is just, this picture is one I just took. It's a water development in South Parlin Flats. And there's two pastures, one on the left, and that moved the slide. One on the left, one on the right. The water, obviously, now we're in the middle. So on the left, though, you can see that that pasture was grazed the year before. And you can see where that livestock concentration was, the grass response to that. And so I took that picture just because I thought that was pretty cool. On the left, it wasn't grazed that season, but on the right, you can see where it was and the grass response that's coming back. Now, that's just what I saw was interesting, how that grass recovered on the left side. Also, that water project there was, the source of that was a development from when they were going to move the mill tailings here from Gunnison out, and they were looking for different areas to put these mill tailings, and they drug some experimental wells just to see if it was appropriate to locate the tailings there. And it didn't end up being in South Parlin Flats, but that ended up being a water well that my dad was instrumental in getting developed to where you could get better distribution of livestock. But then I hear from Dr. Coach yesterday, and I guess that's better distribution of ravens as well. So I don't know, it's hard to, you do one thing that you think is good, and then that creates something else that may be bad. So it's not easy. So this is another example of management that we've had to do on South Parlin Flats for livestock and sage grouse. It's a new fence, and this was part of a pasture that had never had a fence, and then right over this ridge is Highway 114. So you turn the cattle out, and in the past, it wasn't a problem, because if some of the cattle went and got on Highway 114, it was okay. People were doing 35 miles an hour. You'd come around the corner, if they saw a cow on the road, they could go on. We go get the cattle, and life's great. Well, now what happens on Highway 114, and Leonard Kruger knows well, it's trucks doing 65 coming around corners, right? So what happens is you get dead cows. So if you're trying to manage for sage grouse habitat and you're trying to keep your cows alive, plus the people that are driving, because there's so much more traffic, we needed to put a fence in. And so we did that, and it's wildlife friendly and marked, and you can see that's a white wire that's pretty cool stuff. It's new technology, and CPW provided that, Danny Zadra, and then it's just a 3-wire fence, smooth on the bottom, smooth on the top. So you try to have as less of impact as you can with the fence, but you can't manage the livestock without the fence. And so maybe that's where Eric's virtual fencing can even have a greater impact into the future. All right, so this is another project that comes from the same well that my dad worked on getting through, developed in the 1990s, except this is a mile away from that. And this is a new solar pumping project that we worked on in conjunction with multiple partners. And that was one of the speaking points I was supposed to mention was what cooperative, collaborative partnerships have worked best and what hasn't worked. But this, working with BLM, the BLM Grazing Advisory Board, CPW, NRCS with the Sage Grouse Initiative money, enables you to develop a project like this to where this project will water 3 different pastures. It's got the floats on the tanks. It's all a pressurized system from a mile away. And so this will just enable a lot more opportunity for livestock management. Again, I haven't ever seen ravens here, so it'll be interesting now as far as with the water development, if that happens, and then I don't know, we'll work that out when we get to it, I guess. So this is some pictures that I took of a riparian area, and that was another talking point about what successes have you seen as far as grazing management that's changed over the years. And one of the greatest places to work that I enjoy the most is within riparian areas, because you get instant gratification with these. Some of the upland country, it takes longer and it's more difficult to see the grass response, and riparian areas are fun. So anyway, this is May. I believe it's either 2017 or 2019, and we were in a pasture on Doyleville Commons, and it's a riparian pasture that was fenced specifically to make it a riparian pasture so that the riparian area wasn't being impacted during the entire grazing season. So we grazed this for 5 days in May that year, and you can tell it's been grazed. They water in the bottom and then work up into the uplands, which are back here on both sides. So that was right when we left with the cattle. This was mid part of June, so we were still grazing on that allotment, but in different pastures. And so I just came out, and I wasn't trying to do anything. I was just taking pictures, and I saw that and I thought, well, that looks pretty cool. So I wanted to take a picture of the same area about a month later. And then I went back, and this was in July, and you can tell the response is it's amazing. And this is when you're really going to have your grouse coming into those riparian areas is in that, July, August time frame. And that kind of response that's where it's fun. And you see things like that happen. Not sure why that one's there again. And then this picture is, it's that same area where we had grazed before, where I showed you the response. And you can, on the left-hand side, there's a little spring drainage. Sorry. I don't know what I did there. But anyway, there's a little spring drainage that comes down across that road, and there's actually a little campsite there too. This last picture is just a classic example of the private-public relationship between private and public lands. This is on Razor Creek over on our private. This road is on private land, and to the left is irrigated pasture. To the right over in here is the fence line that is where BLM lands begin. And it's hard to see because I was slow with the camera, but right there are a couple grouse, and there were 5 or 6 from a brood, and they were actually just walking up the road. You know how they'll do that. And then they got into the sagebrush, but they just like that interface. And that's early September is when that picture was taken. So I think that's on my slides. I just wanted to say a couple things I mentioned as we went through. But I think that probably greatest thing that's happened in this basin with the 30 years or so where we've been managing for sage grouse, and I don't know why that's doing there. Okay, the computer, it was flashing the screen at me. I'm like, it's not up there. The greatest thing that happened in this basin has been because of the partnerships and the collaboration that's taken place. The attitude of the agricultural community has totally shifted. It used to be in the past, 30 years ago, ranchers knew about sage grouse, but their attitude was, that somebody's going to come get us. So we don't want to talk about them. We just want to do the bare minimum to do what we have to do. And so as these partnerships developed and people got to know each other, classic example was the local working group here and the Sage Grouse Committee, Strategic Committee, but you start developing relationships, right? And then when you're sitting across the table and that person actually becomes a friend, and then you go out and you do a project on the ground and you see some success. And so people, it's hard to get mad at somebody that's your friend, but it's easier to trust them. And then that spreads out into the community as far as the ranching community. And now what you have is the vast majority of ranchers in this basin want to see the grouse succeed, okay? They may come off and be a little tough and a little scruffy around the edges at first, and you're talking about grouse, but then they'll say, well, Greg, how's that let count doing over on that one behind my private? And you'll say, well, it's doing pretty well. And that's the biggest thing that's happened, and we just have to continue to build on that. And there's so many questions about how to manage with cattle and sage grouse and what to do to get the numbers back up where we all want to see them. And I surely wish I knew the answer, because if there was a silver bullet, I think everybody in this room would already have shot and tried to move on. So, but the partnerships and collaboration, I just can't emphasize enough of how successful they've been in this community, and hopefully we can continue on. So that's all I have if there's any questions.